If you're going to turn the podcast off after a few minutes and you only can take one tip from us on divorce-proofing your marriage, my one tip is ask that question to your wife. Do you feel loved by me? There's a whole bunch of ways we're going to talk about now on how a husband is supposed to go about loving their wife.
And this is Abraham's Wallet. Join us weekly and create a culture in your family of multi-generational prosperity, spiritually, relationally, physically, intellectually, and financially. Run your home, your dough, like a biblical boss. Mark, when this airs, Thanksgiving will have just passed. How do you think your Thanksgiving will have gone? I like using that future past tense. How do you think it will have gone?
I think it will have gone very well. And I'm going to go on a limb. I'm going to creep out onto a limb and I'm going to say, I think your Thanksgiving also may have gone really well because you earlier this week were inquiring to me about how would I go about smoking and spatchcocking a turkey.
Oh.
And if you acquire the necessary smoker to do this, then I think you're going to have a really surprisingly joyful Thanksgiving.
That's great. Well, I want to spatchcock that thing to the moon. I want to flatten it out and smoke it away. That's what
there's not too many more joyful moments that just make me feel the joy of the Thanksgiving season than when I've used some bone shears to cut the sternum of a turkey and I give it one good CPR right in the middle and it just flattens out and I know that I have spatchcocked.
Yeah. Do you have to like put a rod through it when it's flattened out to keep it flat?
No, listen, we're not talking, it's not a paper thin. No, it's just what we're trying to do is maximize surface area and boy, howdy, I will be enjoying that turkey. And then the day after Thanksgiving, when everybody else is, waiting in line for the Black Friday sales to open, I am at a local grocery store buying like 2 or 3 more turkeys to stick in the deep freezer at discount prices because I went from very apathetic on turkey to loving it once I discovered the smoking technique.
Okay, now we have been in a contentious, painful, hyped up, with emotions running high, series on divorce, a subject I was just talking about with a friend last night, and he's going like, wow, you guys are hitting divorce. I'm like, we haven't talked about it ever. And it's been like 5 years that we've existed. And by golly, it's about time. And so we've tried to be responsible about that topic. And we've handled it biblically. We've handled it financially. We've tried to give some practical pastoral advice for people in various scenarios. And what are we going to do today to close it out?
I wanted to close this out with how to divorce-proof your marriage. You might say divorce is not an option for us. We would, kind of like we said at the first couple episodes, we would die before we would do divorce. That's great. However, there's still some tips I think would just be edifying to our crew on how to make sure your marriage is thriving and healthy.
If you have truly given yourself over to the covenant of marriage, then it would stand to reason that you want to do whatever you can in your power to make it, say, pleasant, workable, because it ain't going anywhere. You're stuck. If you knew that you never could ever move out of the house that you're living in, you would invest some time and energy and money to make that thing as enjoyable as possible. And that's what marriage is. It's a house you're never getting out of.
Let's jump into this marriage house that we're building that we're all going to live in forever.
Let's do it.
The statistics that I want to start off with real quick suggest that a lot of people aren't going to live in their marriage house forever, though. So You've heard
True.
all sorts of stats. You might have heard 50% of marriages end in divorce. That was true of your boomer parents in some small periods of time. But right now, for evangelical Christians in 2023, the stats that I found all suggested between 20 and 25% of marriages end in divorce.
Okay.
Um, so a little lower than some of the scary stats you've heard, but still, I don't like those odds. If you said we're going parachuting today and 75% of the time the chute's open, I would be uninterested in that expedition.
True.
Um,
True.
so that's one stat to keep in mind. And another one that I thought was very interesting. This came from a paper or an article that Aaron Wren wrote. He's been on our podcast before, and it just came to my email box this morning. But it talked about, he cited a New York Times article that said most men today report unawareness of their wife's happiness when they receive divorce papers, meaning
Wow.
we're not dealing in the same types of divorce that maybe were more common 50 years ago, where a couple is miserable for 10 years and eventually gets a divorce. There's a lot of specifically guys that go, everything seems fine, and then they get divorce papers one day. And that's
Yeah.
something that I think I have some diagnosis as to why that is. But
Oh.
um, the last statistic slash trend I'll note is there's an increasing prevalence of what Rod Dreher called YOLO divorces. So you only live once, YOLO. Um, and that just means there was no obvious cause. There wasn't infidelity or abuse or financial disaster. It was that one person said, yeah, I'm tired of this and life is short, so I'm out. And that's an interesting trend. So those are the statistics. Those are kind of what we're facing when we talk
Yeah.
about divorce. Um, and so how do we avoid being in that any of those buckets? Um, I say that we turn to the scriptures. Would you be game?
This sounds like a great plan. I'm all for it. I'm all ears.
Okay, I'm going to read us a passage that I bet almost everybody listening to this has heard before.
All
And
right.
then we're going to talk about what it actually means. Ephesians 5:25 through 29. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself up for her, so that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word, and that he might present himself to the church in all her glory, having no spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that she would be holy and blameless. So husbands also ought to love their own wives as their own bodies. He who loves his own wife loves himself, for no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as Christ also does the church. So we could spend the rest of this episode exegeting that passage. That's
Mm.
not what I'm going to do. I'm really going to just pull a couple of like themes from this. But I want to tell you, I read this, I don't know, I think it was about 4 years ago, 3 years ago. It wasn't that long ago. And I was thinking, my marriage is great. My wife is a delight to me. All is going well. I read this and I thought, husbands, love your wives. I I do that. I love her so much. And I asked her, I said, do you feel loved by me? And she, who did not hate me, was doing all the great wife things, said, not really. Um, and it was a very jarring response because I thought, oh my gosh, am I in that group of guys who didn't know that things were going poorly? And what I would say is, um, if I could only, if you're going to turn the podcast off after a few minutes and you only can take one tip from us on divorce proofing your marriage, my one tip is ask that question to your wife. Do you feel loved by me? There's a whole bunch of ways we're going to talk about now on how a husband is supposed to go about loving their wives. We're even going to talk about a lot of church stuff I've been a part of kind of caricatures that and makes it seem like it's as simple as you need to be a servant leader or things like that. But I I was pretty upset by it, and then I said, "Well, okay, let's talk about it." And I think it was 6 months later, I asked the question again, and she said, "Yes, I do feel loved by you." And I've really noticed some of the changes, and they were not things like, "Thank you for cleaning the kitchen every day." Um, you know, so that's what I want to talk about is ask your wife that question. It's you want to know how things are going, even if you don't feel like neither of us were. I would say she wasn't even in an unhappy phase of life or anything like that. She was just like, I know you love me, but I often don't feel very loved.
Mm.
Um, and it was transformative for our marriage because now I just ask it regularly. Am I how are you feeling now? My wife is, like I said, an excellent woman and will often follow my asking of that question with, do you feel respected by me? Because the other part of this passage is that wives are called to respect their husbands. Um, but you might not be in a spot where your wife is going to ask you that, and that's okay. We're really not talking about all the things she's supposed to do if you're going to love her. We're just talking about your end of the bargain. And I'm of the opinion that you can do this really well, regardless of if she's holding up her end of the bargain well. And you might even have to start doing this loving your wife stuff well before she's able to respect you. There's a lot of guys
Yeah.
who, because of the things they're missing here, are making themselves virtually unrespectable to a good
Oh,
wife.
oh,
That's my take.
that's a hot take. I think that what we're about to go through, if we're going to do what I think we're going to do, and walk through 5 capitals to talk about how people can strengthen their marriages and make them divorce proof. Sorry, I'm going back to a car analogy for some reason. If there's something happening under the hood that you're unaware of, it's a great threat to you. If you're starting a cross country drive and you have major problems under the hood and you're unaware of them. So I'm with you, Mark, that like we got to know what's actually going on. And even if everything is fine, you and I have to decide that we're going to do maintenance and upkeep regularly. That's just going to be part of the deal. And as I see it, we not only want to be loving and supportive of our wives, but I don't know if these even make sense to you. As I see it, I have to take care of my wife and I have to be interested in her and support her. I also have to care for this separate entity, this new thing that got made when we came together, which is a marriage. So I've got
Mm,
to take care of our marriage. And that has to do with things like the way that we relate to each other. That has to be healthy. She might be doing fine and happy with her life, and I might be doing fine and happy with my life. And yet our marriage isn't strong. And so we've
mm,
got to watch out for, I don't just want her to be like happy and fulfilled. I want our marriage, as you just read about from Ephesians 5. I want that to be working the way that's supposed to. I want that thing to be healthy. And you can't solve all these things in a day, but to be walking down this road like you're describing is a major goal of what it means to be an Abrahamic leader. So yes, I'm all
yeah.
I'm all for it.
No, that's great. Anytime we sit down with a couple that's struggling with marriage stuff, I think one of the first things that one of us says to them is you're going to have to view the marriage as the patient here,
Yes.
not him and her. Like, we're both willing to go all the way to the mat for the sake of the marriage. So that's great. If you just optimize for your wife being a happy, carefree,
Yes.
you end up with the eat, pray, love. Like, I'm going off to Tuscany with some dude for because that's what makes me happy. And, you know,
Yeah.
odds are, if you married a Christian mommy blogger, there's a great risk of her becoming that if you're not careful. So,
Yes.
um, anyways, I think that our model in Ephesians 5 is Christ, and he is the perfect example of one who loves well his bride. And I would argue that he is so good at loving the church, nourishing and cherishing her, because he knows her completely. Jesus, when he died for her, knew that she was going to be a harlot and unfaithful at times.
Yes.
That's the heart of the Father from the story of Israel, from before Israel existed. We talked about it in episode 1 when we talked about Hosea. Like, repeatedly, he knows the failings and the successes, and where he's going to bestow gifts. All this stuff he knows, and that makes him excellent at how to love her. Now, I'm going to argue that as men, it often doesn't come naturally to us to become the world's foremost expert in our wives. But doing so, paying attention to her and studying her, is one of the best sort of ways that we can understand how to love her well, and even how to divorce proof our marriages. So, knowing her is kind of a critical component to loving her, to all of the kind of things that we're called to do. And because we're guys, I know that there's women listening to this, but I'm going to talk as if we're guys.
Sure. We like to pretend that. Yeah.
We like to have some lists. I would assume, Stephen, when you were thinking about that Land Cruiser that broke every two weeks, you had to have a maintenance schedule, and
Yes.
so I think there's risks when we develop lists, but I do think that I'm going to use two different lists. One I'm going to spend most of our time on, which is the 5 capitals. Then I'm going to throw you a cliche Christian book list as well, to just say you should at least check these boxes once in a while. But let's go through the 5 capitals, and just what I want you to think about is, how can you be a student of what's going on with your wife and your marriage in this area, and then as a result of that, be good at loving your wife in this space. Capital number 1, and Stephen, prepare yourself, because this is actually the one I have the least new content, because I feel like we talk about this one a lot. But capital number 1 is spiritual. And we talk about this all the time, but are you leading your family spiritually? What does that look like? And one of the main ingredients to this is, are you spending time with the Lord yourself? Like, that is one of the ways that you know and love your wife, protect your marriage, is that you make it completely impossible that you would spend significant amounts of time away from the word and not praying. Like, so this obviously includes specifically praying for your wife, but it also just includes sitting and listening to the Father's heart, reading the word. Don't try to lead your family if that's not a part of your life. Don't try to lead your family spiritually, because you'll just spout some, I don't know, prepackaged family children's Bible study, and the kids will kind of go, I have a sneaking suspicion that dad isn't really into this, but maybe he's doing it because mom wants him to do it. And my kind of point here is, the norm right now, even in Christian families, is female leadership when it comes to spiritual things.
Fact.
My guess is a lot of people listening to this, well, mom kind of was the one who sort of elbowed dad, we're going to church today. And, not all of you, praise God, but that's the norm for whatever reason. And it will set you apart in your wife's eyes. Again, going back to being a respectable guy. If you just say, I'm actually going to take responsibility for how our family will operate spiritually, what comes into our home in terms of spiritual content. We talked about this in the Protector episode. So, like, how we interact with spiritual community, how we receive teaching, it all flows through me. And being the spiritual leader of your family looks like a lot more, like I said, than just I read the Bible at dinner. Although you should do that too, because it's a great tip.
Yeah. When it comes to how do I use spiritual capital to divorce proof my marriage, as you just did with Ephesians 5, really one of the basic, most important things you can do is stare at God's setup. What's God's structure? What's God's heart about this thing? And so that we can, even when you're walking through your day, you're living out your marriage, you're thinking in your mind, you're comparing and making adjustments based on that blueprint of God's word. So I'm a big fan of how can we get married couples to stare at God's principles. So I think throughout this episode, I'm going to throw out some resources. And so I'm going to mention studies that I trust. One is called 5 Aspects of Man, 5 Aspects of Woman. They're two different things, and they're just a profile of what does the scripture say about what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman. And so many of us have been so formed by our school background, by the sorority you were in. Well, we're talking to guys here. Sorry, the fraternity you were in college, your networking group for work or whatever. That those become our formative constructs. And again, we have to lay pillars in our minds and in our hearts about what is God's word. So I really like those studies. I wrote a study with my wife in my first 2 years of marriage. I don't think we've ever talked about it here. It's called the Bride and the Groom, and it's about that passage you just read, and what are aspects of marriage that we can compare against the God church picture. And I'd like to make that available. We're actually getting that worked on right now. We just picked a good time to bring it up. We're getting it worked on to be presentable, to be a kind of modernized in its layout. So we're working on a PDF version that we can give to all of our people. I think those kind of things are really smart. And I'll just say, if you're not doing anything to spiritually lead your marriage and your home, start with let's get together. Let's it doesn't be a Saturday morning at 11 a.m. We'll all be there. It could just be you're all at dinner and you say, hey, before we get up, I'm just going to read 5 verses out of the book of Matthew. And you read some scripture, and then you say, why don't we pause and we'll just pray and respond to God based on what we just read. That alone, that moment, which could take 5 minutes to read a few verses, and then let's have a prayer time as a family about this passage. That is more spiritual leadership than most American families ever see. So I don't want you to think, well, you guys talk about spiritual leadership. I mean, gee whiz, I'm no Bible scholar. You don't have to be a Bible scholar. Just take a few minutes and say, hey, I'm pushing the ball down the field as far as our family goes. And then as you said, Mark, my last thing is, by golly, if you're not doing this, pray for your spouse and pray for your marriage. You could pause this right now and take 1 minute and pray for your spouse and pray for your marriage, and it would matter. It'd be a good thing to do. So those are all my thoughts on spiritual.
Awesome. The next capital in our list of 5 capitals is relational capital. And this one is really important when we think about divorce, even if we just say, what do the statistics look like? I will tell you, there's the relationship between you and your spouse, very important one. There's also the relationships outside of your family and outside of your marriage. Those are also very important to how your marriage is going. So women are 4 times more likely, according to the study I read this morning, to seriously consider divorce if someone in their close friend group already has done it. Specifically, this applies to that no specific cause divorce. So when
Mm.
there's no infidelity, no abuse, no financial
YOLO.
disaster, the YOLO divorce, very influenced. If you're in a group of people where somebody has broken the ice, um, and did you know that men, as they age, also statistically, they have fewer and fewer friends. Have you heard this before, Steve?
No, no.
So most men by age 60 cannot point to anybody that they would call a close friend outside of their spouse. Conversely,
Wow.
women go the opposite direction. As they hit their 60s, they tend to have more friends than they have at other stages of life.
Mm.
Some of this makes sense. Men tend to have a lot of those
Yeah.
friendship relationships in kind of youth and college, and even then in the workplace. And then they get more and more isolated. Whereas women, a lot of times, busy with the household with little kids and things like that. And then they get more and more time and they kind of branch out. Um,
Yeah.
so again, this gets to be very important who your friends are and who your spouse's friends are. But one thing that my wife said to me as we were talking about this is she said, guys who don't have close friends who could actually be corrective to them, and like a group of guys that can call them out if they're stepping outside of the boundaries of what a guy should
Yes.
be doing. She's like, they're going to put a ton of weight on their wives and sort of like, well, I guess you're my only confidant and you're the only one that I talk about anything important with. And B, she's going to be like, this isn't my boyfriend anymore. This is the guy that I just have to try to like keep in line, and I have to like, it really is bad for the relationship. And it's hard to respect a guy who's kind of looking to you as a woman, as kind of, you're just my everything. You hear a lot of guys say, my wife is my best friend. And that's fine if the sentiment is, I really like my wife, I love hanging out with her, I feel that way too. But if what you mean is she fulfills all friend roles for me, you're in a
Yeah.
disordered situation and it's
Ooh.
actually harming your marriage. You have to
Ooh.
go get a pack of dudes who can call you to the carpet when you need it. Um, we talked about the pornography thing a couple weeks ago, and my wife, you talked about how some Christian women get so wound up, and their response if they hear that their husband has sinned in this way is to just be like, I need to lock him down and like
Yeah.
monitor everything he does.
Right.
And I've heard my wife counsel other women so many times, like, you have to stop that. He has to have a group of guys that are holding him accountable and
Yeah.
completely invested in his health in that way. Because if you try to fill that role, it's going to create some whack disorder in your marriage. And
Yeah.
she has said to me many times, I love it that I don't have to ask you about this stuff because you have men who are always asking you about this stuff.
Mm.
So having healthy friendships and relationships outside of your marriage actually helps to divorce proof your marriage.
That's great. And if I may editorialize
Yeah.
based on what you said, first first I have to make this comment. You said get a pack of dudes, and I've got you on low volume here at my desk. And I thought you said get a pack of nudes, and then you were saying that no, pornography is not a good idea. And I thought, oh yeah, get a pack of dudes. Yeah, that's better. So my editorial comment is that
I'm
when
just
a
confused. I'm confused here. What even came to your mind? Like the idea that if you were in sort of search of sexually explicit content, you would go to the corner store and say, "I'll have one pack of nudes." Like that's a thing.
I mean, I assumed some kind of joke was coming, but
Oh
anyhow,
no,
yeah, I don't know what that looked like because I think of when you get a pack of baseball cards as a kid,
exactly.
and anyhow, um, my editorial comment is that when a guy confesses specifically pornography or lust sins to a wife, I've seen this over and over, that her move is then, and I'm sorry, there's so many thoughts going through my head because I spend time with young men as well, and I tell them the following: learning self-control is a skill that it's supposed to happen when you're a young man. It's supposed to happen before you create any kind of habits, bad habits around any of this stuff. And then you get to enjoy the benefits of that self-control for the rest of your life. One of those benefits is that your wife trusts you. Well, that's pretty nice deal. And when a wife loses that, loses the image breaks that she had of her husband's sexual purity, then she does this move where she wants to start digging. I need to find out everything that's ever happened in your mind. That's the only way I'll feel safe. I have to know everything. When we go to a restaurant, I'm staring at his eyes the entire time because I have to know, because this loser can't control himself. So I have to. It's such a bad move. It's such a bad look. It's bad for both parties in a marriage. And as you say, Mark, man, do we need guys around us that'll just ask us a really uncomfortable question every once in a while. I do that just to keep my friendships on the cutting edge, honestly. And I had an old friend that used to do this with me. And this is a Christian guy. And he would say, he would just kind of, the hello, how's it going? His question would be like, so you getting laid at home? What? I was about to order my latte. And he's like, why don't we just talk about that for a second? Everybody needs to talk about it. Okay. So anyways, good stuff there. Are we in relational right now?
Yes, we're wrapping up relational.
Okay, can I throw out my 2 cents on this subject?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. The number one thing I would say that for myself, I'm married to a busy person. We both have a lot of irons on the fire. She works a couple of days a week outside the house when the kids are at school. I have a lot of irons in the fire. We have ministry things that we do mornings and nights. There's a lot of passing. And so one thing that we've done, I know I've talked about this before, but I can't help myself. We're talking about relational, is that I have a weekly meeting set up with my wife. And we check so many boxes off in this weekly meeting. We have 90 minutes. We leave the house out of our front door and we walk. And there's 2 coffee shops within walking distance of our house. It doesn't matter if you're going to the Exxon station. You can go, it doesn't matter. We go on a walk and the phones are away. And I have an agenda. It's my job to set up what we're going to do during that time. And really, my agenda is mostly in a year's time, walking through different aspects of the goals that we have set at the summit that I'll talk about later. But we're talking about current events happening. What's going to happen on this upcoming trip? What are we going to do with there's an offer for the kid to be in the select basketball team. Are we going to do that? How do we feel about that? And we just talk about the mechanics of life. We talk about, my wife is still working through some stuff after her father passed away, and we're still trying to get accounts settled there. So we can talk about stuff there, stuff that it's crazy to think. I exchange texts and emails with my wife to try to sit down and go, okay, we opened the IRA for the oldest child, right? And how are we? Just mechanics. And so those times are really magical for us because everything stops. I do it in the morning. I do it during the workday. We're both fresh. You ever notice when you try to get a meeting with your wife before bed, hey, can we have a half hour after the kids go to bed? And she's zonked. Understandable, but I wanted a time that where we're both fresh. So we've carved out this time, we protect it. And during that time, it's a regular thing to ask the kind of questions that you mentioned, Mark, to just say, as we're walking along, how's your day? How are you feeling? I like to ask her this question. How are you doing in your life right now? Or how do you feel about your life? Are you happy with your life? And just an open-ended question to just listen. So I really love that weekly meeting for our relationship. It's great. I'll tell you another couple of things. You might put this in a different category, Mark. I don't know whether you were going here or not for today's episode. But if you want to divorce proof your marriage, pursue your wife sexually. Let me just say that very simply. Pursue her. Tell her that you want her body, and say, like, I like you. I want you. When can we make that happen? I'm real interested in you. Do you want your wife to feel confident that you're not, to try to keep the euphemism, expressing your sexuality somewhere else? Focus it on her. That's very good for your marriage. It's good for your relationship. That's why I put it in this category. And the last thing that came to mind as far as relationship is that, the Jewish practice is that on the Sabbath, around the Sabbath meal, they read Proverbs 31. And the reason is because, and I know there's all sorts of reasons why this doesn't happen and blah, blah, blah. But in a normal Jewish home, traditionally, the father is so honored and respected and submitted to throughout the week. He's honored. His wins are the family's wins. He is deferred to as far as, what do you want to eat? Well, the question is, well, what does dad like to eat? There's so much deference to him in a normal week that when it comes to the Sabbath meal, that's traditionally seen as, this is the time that we honor mom. And so the Proverbs 31 passage about the wife of noble character, that passage is read at every Sabbath. And we have made that a habit, that we do that on Sabbaths, and we just praise her. And I compliment her in front of the children. And we know there's a section in the end where it says, your children will rise up and call you blessed. We all stand up and we say that last verse. There's some women that are all right, but you outdo them all. And charm is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. We say all those things to her. And I think that's a good move for your relationship to keep things topped up on praising your wife.
Yeah, my youngest daughter, there's different questions at Shabbat that, like, each of the kids that's their thing. And whenever we have a new family over, one of the questions I always ask when I'm trying to explain what Shabbat is what's another name for this thing we're doing? And little Sloan will raise her hand and say, it's the Feast of Mothers. And so that's another name that is used for Shabbat, is the Feast of Mothers. It's the only feast that happens every week. And just to expound on that for a second, I had to grab a buddy, going back to having friends that'll do this to you. I had to grab a buddy because he had done something that I and myself have done in the past, and wife had a birthday, and not I think nothing happened. Nothing. And it wasn't a small birthday. It was a major birthday. And I had to be like, what the heck are you thinking? And this is where we'll get into this at the end, but you might say, well, my wife, she's not really the type who this is a big deal to her. She likes this type of attention. And that actually might be totally true, but there are things you cannot skip. So make a deal of your anniversary, make a deal when there's a birthday, and then, work your way into making a big deal of her at least once a week. And Shabbat is a great way to do that. But for goodness sakes, we'll talk about this even on the financial section. There are times when you are required to go over and above. And if you flop, I've done this, I have flopped entirely. All is not lost. I had a birthday where it ended in tears and crying, and this was very early in my marriage, and we said, you know what, we're gonna do over. And she had grace for me, but I was learning. I was a young guy and I was learning. There's an article on the blog even about a Mother's Day that I much later in my marriage screwed up.
That's true.
So you can
Yes,
go
that's
look up
true.
A Cautionary Mother's Day Tale if you want to hear about that.
Yes.
Just so that we keep going, physical, you already touched on one of the big things that guys think about here, which is how can I get a little more physical love with the wife? Um,
Yeah.
and a lot of guys think about that. I think what you said is great. I remember when we were kind of digging into that response I got, I don't feel very loved by you right now. That was one of the things is uh I'm not sure what you think about the way I look. And I thought, holy cow, I love the way you look. But I just hadn't been expressing it in a way that was
Right.
received. So that was great for me to know. Um, but a lot of guys think about this, but they don't really invest the time to understand like what's going on with their wife physically. Women are very different from men physically. There are times, so like
Very different.
understanding what's going on with your wife's body and how is she going to feel right now. I got into a little bit of a back and forth with a guy on Twitter this week because he had put up a podcast about this with somebody else, and the first thing they said was it is a husband's duty to really understand the inner workings of his wife's body and cycle and how that all is going to impact her mood and even when are the best times to like approach her for different things. I thought that was all really good. Now the guy he had on his podcast was an abject uh, quack, and everything he said after that point was wrong. But it is important. So I think that's one of the pieces. The other thing I really want to talk about is that, like spiritual issues, I see that it is often the default that mom ends up taking the lead on health in the home.
Mm,
And I don't think that's good. I think
mm.
that I'm not saying keep your wives out of health decisions. I think you want to team up on this for sure. But dad, take the lead on physical health in the home. And some of the questions you can ask yourself about your wife, like, does she have time to exercise? If you're in little kid zone and you're at work
Yes.
all day and you come home and she's exhausted and you need to figure out how is that going to work because that is a critical piece of just feeling good. Not exercising leads for both of you much higher instances of things like depression and obviously physical impacts in terms of your long-term health. um, is she going off the rails into some form of medical healthcare quackery? I'm not going to go deep into this, but I will say that observationally, I've seen that wives are much more subject to sort of, oh, I don't feel good. There's some of that comes from what we talked about a second ago. There's changes that start happening in a woman's body that do make them feel bad. There's spiritual attacks. There's all sorts of things that could lead to I don't feel good. But I have found somebody who tells me, you know, traditional medicine doesn't understand anything, and I can solve my problems this way. Um, and I've seen many families spend a huge chunk of their money on this stuff, and I've seen it have major bad impact on all sorts of areas. So I'm not going to get into prescriptions about what you can and can't do there, but keep an eye on where are we getting our information, where are we getting healthcare? Does it, are we coming up with things that are completely different than what kind of traditional wisdom says when it comes to health? We should put extra scrutiny onto those things to make sure we're not treading into kind of danger zone. Um, another piece of physical health that I just wrote down, does she feel safe, physically safe? We talked about that in the protector episode. But if you live in a bad neighborhood and you're telling her, well, if somebody comes through the doors, like we'll just farkle for who goes downstairs and takes a bat to them. That's not good. We covered
Right.
this for a whole episode, so I think that's the basic piece of it. But the only story I want to tell on physical health comes from my wife. Is very interested in exercise and CrossFit and stuff like that, so she's very attuned to how physical health is going. but she announced to me not that long ago, she said, I think I have about 3 or 4 pounds I'd like to lose. I've been indulging in some desserts and things like that, and I just need to be better about mostly my nutrition. And so I said, awesome. And then 2 days later, she came home from getting the kids from school and had a gigantic, like the size of her head, muffin in her hand. And I said,
Oh,
well, that doesn't seem to match your goals, wife. And she's like, well, I don't feel, I've been kind of having a bad day. I'm going to eat this muffin. And I said, honey, put the muffin down. And in the moment, she was not that pleased with what I was saying to her, because she really was thinking I would like to eat this muffin. But on almost all of these areas, this should not be the headline, but there are times when you will need to oppose your wife in order to love her and take care of her.
it's true.
So I think that could be on physical. There's all sorts of play. I even talked about some of them, but um, if you think loving means I'm trying to create a great
Rolling
physical, I'm
over.
taking care of her, but if anything she disagreed with me on, I'm gonna defer to her. Well, you're not doing a good job, and she's also not gonna respect you in the long run because you're basically just saying, I'm here to do what you want. That's the caricature of Mr. Servant Leader who doesn't actually inspire any respect. And
It's
going back
true.
to even your physical thing, women do not have romantic interest in guys like that, just to be totally
Yeah.
honest with you. Obviously, there's a ditch on the other side of that road that's like, I'm going to just assert myself. And
Yeah.
the the opposite is 100% true too. If your wife feels like he never listens to me and he always does what he wants, that's garbage. Bad news bears, don't do it.
Sure.
But don't think opposing my wife equals not loving my wife. Those two things are not at all the same.
That's good. I've got two things on physical. The first is very physical, your physical body. There's a passage in First Corinthians 7 that says that your body doesn't belong to you alone, it belongs to your spouse. So when you talk about physical, taking care of your body and physical fitness, hey guys, look nice for your wife's sake. Okay. If you need to lose a few pounds and you think, well, she doesn't mind it, I know I could look better, but she's all right with it. She loves me. She's a good woman. Hey guys, do better than that. Do better than
Amen.
she'll tolerate the way that I look. Get a nice haircut, guys. Uh, wear nice clothes. I get to work from home, so I could wear sweats every day and it's just fine. It might be just fine. You might not lose your job, but you might lose the respect of your wife. Whoops. So make an effort, dudes. I mean, should be 101 for your man gang, that you slap each other around and go, you're gonna, it's like Jerry Seinfeld would say this to George. Gonna wear those sweats again? Really going with the sweats? And just guys, if you need to lose some weight, if you need to grow some muscles, put some effort in for your wife. Okay, that's number one. The second thing is when we think of physical capital, we also think of your schedule, like where you are and what the house is like. So I'm gonna file this under physical, which is getting away, taking time to get away and to talk about your relationship. Now, we are proponents of the summit, which generally happens at the end of the year. I hope everybody's got those planned to do that we're in November, in the next month, should be. But for me, we also do a getaway around my anniversary, which happens to be in May. And so it's a nice balance for the kind of the businessy summit, which is about goals and what are we going to do with our lives. We have this summit that we do in May. Your anniversary is a good excuse to go, let's do a getaway. And we focus on our relationship. And I'll just tell you a couple of things, a couple of aspects about that, which I really encourage. One is at every getaway, I've been married 21 years. At every anniversary, we review our vows. We talk about our vows. what we said to each other. Do you remember those commitments you made in front of God and everybody else? Let's talk about those. And how are we doing on this? And guess what? We're not batting 1,000 on all of them. They're very good reminders. And take that time to, when we're talking about sort of asking those questions, are you happy? How's our marriage? This is a great time to do it. I'm going to put the following, I'm going to scream through these and I'm going to put them in the show notes, but I'm going to give you 10 questions that you could ask on your anniversary getaway. You ready? Here they are. He asks, how do you experience me laying down my life for you? She asks, how do you experience me submitting myself to you? He asks, where do you wish I'd lay down my life for you? She asks, where do you wish I'd submit to you? He asks, what's an aspect of our relationship I can work on? She asks the same question. Number 7, he says, what's the number one thing you need from me right now? If you can't come up with that, you should definitely ask. She asks him the same question. And the last question they're going to ask each other is, what do you think God is saying to you right now that you need to grow in so that I can support you in that thing? And it's just a pulse check about it's such a feeling of relief and actually power to walk away going like, I know the status of my marriage right now. And it's great. It's a great thing. The other thing, and I'm going to throw another resource at you, last thing, is when you do these kind of getaways for the sake of your marriage, there's a lot of places you can go. Your church will offer a marriage retreat getaway. Do it. Be one of those people that go, we do those. There is an outfit called Family Life. They offer something. It's all over the nation. It happens. They're called Weekends to Remember. And it's a Christian thing. And you go with your spouse, you stay in some hotel, and it's a conference, and it's all about your marriage. Do those things. Be the kind of people that go, we're constantly trying to improve our marriage. You'll benefit not only yourself, you benefit everybody on your downline. You'll benefit all of your friends because they are now in the circle with somebody who does that kind of thing. You benefit your children. You benefit all of the observers of your life. Now, why are you guys getting childcare this weekend? Well, we do this conference. We're building in our marriage, etc. So I'm talking too much. That's physical.
We've really just got 2 capitals left, and we've kind of covered those ditches as we go. So I think we might end up with just the 5 capitals. But the next one is intellectual. This one I don't have a ton for, but I will say, do you remember Billy Madison, the Adam Sandler movie, where he has to go back through school and complete each grade? I think it's kindergarten or first grade. He has this crazy teacher, Miss Lippy, and she's so good with the tiny little kids, but then he accidentally stumbles in the classroom during recess and she's crazy. I think if your wife spends her entire day homeschooling or taking care of little kids, specifically, and she has no adult intellectual stimulation regularly, you need to make sure and address that, or you run the risk of ending up with crazy Miss Lippy who only talks to first graders all day. So that can look a bunch of ways. It can be, hey, we're going to have you take a class. It could just be, can we make sure that we're involved with other adults in settings where we can have really conversations that just couldn't happen with little kids? I would say attune to your wife and figure out what kind of tickles her intellectual needs. So maybe it's, hey, we're going to read a really interesting book together and we're just going to talk about that. But ideally, creating opportunity for there to be intellectual pursuits outside of, really even outside. I would say it's good to go outside of just you and your wife so that she's getting exposure to adults. That's important when you're in that phase of heads down mothering of little ones, especially. But it's not a bad idea for everybody.
That's great. On that note, especially if you're in your first 5 years of marriage, as I said before, you should really concentrate on, how do I be great at this? I'm in this for a 60-year marriage. So I want to be really good at this. I want to get it the way that God describes it. So I'd like to recommend a couple of resources for your intellectual capital as you study. And I'll also say my wife has been in a book study group in the last couple of years, and it has been great for our marriage. You know why? Because she's studying wife and woman stuff with women. And so she's getting that same truth telling, challenging kind of environment with women that I want to have with men. It's great. And a couple of books I could recommend on the topic of wifing would be Eve in Exile, great book. There's one that it's a pretty stout drink of coffee, so I don't know if you can take it, but it's Created to Be His Helpmeet by Debbie Pearl. It is strong language about a guy. It's from this older lady who sounds rather fed up with the modern woman, and she's like, "You need to come correct and get to the biblical model." So not everybody can take Debbie Pearl, but the things she says in it are true. And then I would recommend, I don't know if you have any thoughts on this, Mark. I recommend Man of the House by C.R. Wiley for men to kind of get their head around what's this leadership role that you and I are describing. And how can I just give me something to kind of put my hands around. We are also fans of masculine Christianity. Is that what it's called? Yeah, masculine Christianity. It's just a book about
Zach Garris.
There you go, Zach Garris. And then the last thing so I'll throw it over to you if you have other books you'd recommend. But the last thing I'd say on intellectual is I got to throw this out. We talk about this every year, and we've done entire episodes about it. But the Goals Summit. So to have a game plan about what you're going to do in your family and to hammer that out with your wife is a powerful tool. It makes you feel like, I know the game plan. I know what we're trying to do. We have a whole tool that we furnish for free for you to go have a goals summit. That's such an important kind of building tool for a marriage. And I think it puts you on an intellectual plane where, as a guy who's idea driven and he kind of wants an external thing to working on me is kind of confusing and I'm not good at it, but working on something external, well, your marriage is something you can work on, and having a plan for what your family's going to do in the next year, it can be very relieving and empowering. So that's what I'd throw in for intellectual.
My wife, I think, is a blessing to me because she read both of those and she's like, well, yeah, I totally disagreed with things, but overall, these are great books and we're pulling on the same rope. And so if you can approach them that way, if you're going to get twerked because they say something ridiculous here and there, then maybe you need to have those books be something that you get guided through instead of just picking them up and reading them.
That's fair.
Let's get to the thing that we do here at Abraham's Wallet, which is financial, the last capital, the least important, and sometimes the easiest to trade for other capitals. A whole lot of the stuff we've been talking about, you can buy. You can go out and buy a killer birthday party for your wife, and you can buy a retreat with your wife, and you can buy a gym membership and a book and all that. So a lot of times we're trading money for other capitals, but we also want to manage this area well. Let me give you a statistic, Stephen. Did you know that women earning even moderately more in a marriage than their husband results in a much higher likelihood that the husband will require the use of ED medication?
Wow. I did not know that. That's a fascinating statistic.
And the risk of divorce, even for a moderate disparity in which the woman earns more than the man, is increased by 50% according to the studies.
Wow.
This is not totally surprising when we think about the fact that, well, a lot of people, if they're in a marriage where the husband's the sole breadwinner, the women just go, well, I guess I'm staying because what else would I do? I'm not saying, the financial capital section is not saying if your wife earns more than you, you're completely failing here and doing it wrong. That's not what I'm saying. I do want husbands to know that in this area, like all these other areas, it is your role to take the lead. there's a story that I experienced this week that really helped me see what that looks like. I was meeting with somebody who had lost their job, and they kind of had some decisions to make about benefits and how they were going to approach severance and things like that. And he told me, I sat down with my wife right before I kind of made the final decisions here and reported back to the old employer, and she got really stressed out. Well, what are we going to do? And why are you asking me to make these decisions? And he said, and I looked her in the eyes and I said, just so you know, I've already made the decisions. I'm trying to honor you by bringing you into this conversation, but I want you to know I've got this handled and you can trust me. And he said, as soon as I said that, physical changes happened. Intellectual, I could see the worry starting to go away.
Wow.
And she went, okay, I can trust him. He is going to take care of me financially, and I don't have to freak out. So that's a situation where, even though this guy, part of what he wanted to talk about with me was like, okay, buddy, so how are we going to do this? He led his family and said, A, we trust in the Lord. And B, I know that I am a guy who is willing to go out and provide, and I can do all sorts of things to make sure that my kids are eating and the home we have is paid for, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that guys being clear on the fact that regardless of whether you're one income or whether your wife works outside the home, like you are on the hook for provision and for financial leadership. Now,
Yeah.
I do see guys occasionally screw up things because they think what that means is, all right, I've heard your teaching and I'm going to send the wife away, and I'm terrible with money, but I'm going to go in my office and close the door, and I'll come out with a budget and a balanced checkbook. And maybe his wife is like, well, I'm an accountant and I'm pretty good at that stuff. So you
Right.
can leverage your wife's skills on all manner of financial things. Like, take advantage of the way that the Lord has gifted you as a family, and it doesn't have to be him or her. One thing I noticed when we do financial plans for families is often, just because of the way the Lord has made men and women differently, when a new family comes to work with us at Outpost for financial planning, often it's kind of the woman in the couple who's like, we need to get a plan and we need to maybe get something together,
Right.
and I'm feeling nervous. And they come in with what I would call more of a female led financial life. And we go through planning, and one of the things I'm doing, really regardless of whether this couple even believes in the Bible, I'm like, I think you will thrive if you're kind of operating in the roles that God made you to operate in. um, a lot of times I realize that family leaves with a more husband led money situation. And people really enjoy that. So, one of the things you can do in this financial capital area to love your wife is just make a plan. And that could be a simple plan or it could be a very complex plan. But saying, I've actually put some thought into how we're going to fill in the blank with whatever's in front of you. It might be, we have a bunch of credit card debt. Well, I have stopped ignoring that and hoping it would go away. And I have decided I'm going to make a plan and we're going to pay it
Yeah.
down. Even if that's a 30-year project for you, we have a plan. You can trust me. And then it may be, hey, you've got some dreams and I'm starting to plan. And I guarantee you, your wife, if she said things to you and you've kind of said, well, we can't afford that right now. Okay. But if you came to her and said, I've been thinking about some of the dreams you've thrown out. Maybe we did a goals summit. And I've been thinking about how we could start, even in a small way, to make moves towards making that a financial reality at some point. Your wife will start going, ooh, I feel very like he's tuning into me and hearing me,
Right.
and that's nice. So
I would like to give myself to him physically.
that could result. Um,
Yeah.
the last thing I wanted to say on financial is maybe the opposite advice you thought you would hear here, but waste money on your wife sometimes. It drives me bananas when I hear guys say like, well, flowers, they just die, and she doesn't need that to know that I love her. Yes, she does. She needs to
Yes,
see
she
you.
does.
She needs to see you do things that don't make financial sense from time to time. I am not saying, she really likes that new Land Cruiser they're coming out with next year, and we make 60 grand a year, but I'm going to go figure out a way to put that in the driveway with a bow on it. Don't be stupid, have a
Yes,
plan. But whatever it is, hey, I was at the gas station and they had that diet cherry vanilla Coke that you love so much, so I just bought you one. Uh,
totally.
Spend money. It doesn't have to be a lot to let her know I didn't have to, but I was thinking of you and I wanted to make some overture to let you know that while I was out and about in the world, I was thinking about you. So spend
Totally.
money on her regularly. And yes, spend money on the big events, but also sometimes just do it for the heck of it.
I love that. I second that emotion. That's what that was going to be one of my major points on this. Don't ever let it happen. That story that you told, don't ever let it happen that a birthday, an anniversary, a Mother's Day, or a Christmas goes by that you didn't put a little bit of energy and money, maybe money. Maybe you need to write her a poem. That'd be fine too. But don't be stingy on money when it comes to celebrating your wife. That's a huge thing. Um, you know, if we go back to the introduction, the day that you find out, oh, I haven't been happy for 5 years. I haven't felt loved by you in years. I'm on I'm on step 5 of divorce proceedings. This is when I need you to start signing things. You don't want this to happen to you. You lose her, and everything. The house of cards falls flat if you lose her. She's it, man. She's your second half. We were just looking last night with a Bible study group about how God made them. When it says He made them male and female, He made them to click together, and they made a whole together. They integrated these two parts, integrated to make this thing that would expand dominion on the earth and would multiply themselves. The man can't do that. The woman can't do that. They're supposed to click together, integrate, and together they can do these things. They can do this, the creation mandate of Genesis 1. And the only thing I would say, as silly as it sounds, when you talk about like have a plan, be a financial leader, if that feels overwhelming to you at all, here's my piece of advice. Ready for it? Listen to Abraham's Wallet. That's my recommendation to you, because that's the whole reason that we came into being, is thinking, we know that there's dudes like you out there, and you think, I don't know nothing about no retirement accounts. I don't know what's the best investment vehicles. That's why we exist. We want to help furnish you and give you layups, to equip you, to educate you. And I say that zero tongue in cheek, unapologetically. Listen to you. You know, by the way, we don't talk about current events very much. You could go back through our library and go, well, I don't understand that topic very much. Maybe I should listen to that. Just go back through the library. The things that we talk about and teach are evergreen. We love you, and you don't have to be a financial expert in all ways, but you should have friends who are, and we're your friend.